The sky turned red over Seoul on the morning of March 15th, 2287. Teo watched from behind the ruins of a collapsed overpass as massive ships descended through the clouds. These were not human aircraft. These were something else entirely. The ships were dark and twisted, shaped like nothing that Earth's engineers had ever designed. They moved with purpose and intelligence, spreading out across the city like hunters closing in on prey. Teo was a commander in the South Korean military. He had spent 20 years training soldiers to protect his country. That experience meant nothing now. He had watched his entire unit get destroyed in less than 3 minutes. The aliens had weapons that burned through steel and concrete as if they were made of paper. Soldiers who had trained for every conventional warfare scenario fell like leaves in the wind. When the plasma fire started, Teo ordered his men to scatter. Only 3 made it out alive. The rest became ash on the streets of Seoul. He ran deeper into the ruins, his uniform torn and burned. Behind him, he could hear the sound of the alien machines moving through the city. They were methodical, searching every building, every corner. They were not trying to kill everyone at random. They were looking for something. They were looking for people. Teo realized with growing horror that this was not a bombing campaign. This was a capture operation. Within the first week, all resistance crumbled. The alien ships, which humans would later learn, belonged to the Dominion Alliance, attacked every major military installation on Earth simultaneously. No country was spared. No defense system worked against weapons that operated on principles humans did not understand. Governments that had ruled for decades fell in hours. Within 2 weeks, the leaders of Earth's nations were forced to stand before cameras and announce humanity's surrender. The aliens themselves appeared for the first time at the surrender ceremony broadcast globally. They called themselves the Valkyrie. They were tall and thin, with skin that shimmered between blue and purple. Their eyes were large and dark, and they seemed to look right through human bodies as if they could see something inside that humans themselves could not perceive. There was no mercy in those eyes. There was only cold intelligence and absolute certainty in their own superiority. The Valkyrie leader, who called himself the Supreme Collective, announced the new order. Humanity was now part of the Dominion Alliance. This meant one thing: humans would serve. They would work in mines, factories, and research centers. They would build ships for the Dominion Alliance. They would do whatever their new masters demanded. Those who resisted would be eliminated. Those who obeyed would be allowed to live. It was that simple. Teo heard the announcement from inside an abandoned subway station where he had been hiding with 14 other survivors. A small radio crackled with the Supreme Collective's voice. The alien leader spoke perfect English, which was somehow more terrifying than if they had needed translators. The Valkyrie did not just conquer. They had studied Earth. They understood human culture. They had come prepared to rule. Within a month, the neural compliance chips appeared. The Valkyrie soldiers moved through every city, every town, every village. They captured humans by the thousands. No one could resist. The chips were small, no bigger than a grain of rice. They were inserted into the back of the neck through a painless procedure that took only seconds. After the procedure was complete, something changed inside the human mind. Resistance became impossible. The desire to disobey simply vanished from the conscious mind. Millions of humans lined up without resistance as the chips were inserted. Some cried, some tried to run. But eventually, the chips were placed in nearly every human alive. The world's population fell into an eerie calm. People went to work because the chips made them want to work. They obeyed their alien masters because the chips made obedience feel natural. They stopped asking why they were working. They stopped thinking about freedom. They became what the Valkyrie wanted them to be: empty vessels ready to serve. Teo managed to avoid the chip longer than most. He stayed hidden in the ruins, moving at night, finding food where he could. He watched his city transform into something he barely recognized. The streets filled with alien technology. Massive structures were built to process humans and assign them to work details. The Velkari built their own settlements on the edges of human cities, beautiful and clean and utterly cold. After 6 months of hiding, Teo's time ran out. A patrol of Velkari soldiers found him in an old building near the Han River. He could have fought. He could have died with his dignity intact. But something made him run instead. Some small part of him that still wanted to live, that still believed survival mattered, drove him to hide. The soldiers caught him easily. He was unarmed and exhausted. They did not kill him. They had something worse in mind. 2 hours later, Teo found himself in a vast medical facility filled with thousands of other humans. They were stripped of their clothes and lined up. The procedure was efficient. Teo felt the small device slide into the back of his neck. There was a moment of sharp pain, then nothing. For a brief second, he wondered what would happen next. And then the chip activated. For just a moment, Teo felt something dark wash over his mind. It felt like drowning in cold water. His desire to resist, to survive as an individual, to question the alien masters, seemed to slip away like sand through his fingers. He could feel the chip working, remaking him from the inside out. But something was wrong. Something in his neural chemistry was different from the billions of other humans who had received the chip. The control slipped. For just a fraction of a second, Teo felt it fail. Then it seemed to hold again. He was led away with the other newly chipped humans to a work assignment. He was told he would be working in a factory that produced alien equipment. He accepted this without emotion. He had to. The chip would not allow him to do anything else. But in that one moment when the chip had failed, something had flickered in Teo's mind. A memory of who he had been, a soldier, a commander, a man who had sworn to protect his people. That memory was small and fragile, buried deep beneath the weight of the compliance chip's control. But it was there, and it was waiting. Thousands of kilometers away, in a research facility in Busan, a woman named Hai Won was making a discovery. She was a brilliant astrophysicist, forced to work for the Velkari, studying human biology and alien technology. The aliens believed she was simply a tool, a convenient human mind to solve their problems. They did not know that she was beginning to understand the neural chips. They did not know that she could see the flaw that Teo had accidentally discovered. And they did not know that she was already beginning to think about how that flaw might be exploited. Earth had fallen. Humanity had been enslaved. The Velkari celebrated their victory, confident that their rule would last forever. They had no idea that the seeds of their own destruction were already beginning to grow. 18 months. That was how long it took for the cracks to appear in the alien control network. Teo had been working in the factory every day since receiving the chip. He worked 12 hours, ate a small meal, slept in a crowded dormitory, and then worked again. This was his life now. This was the life of every enslaved human. The chips made them obedient, made them efficient, made them into perfect workers. But they could not make everyone the same. The glitch in Teo's chip persisted. It was small, almost unnoticeable. For most of each day, the compliance system worked perfectly. He thought what the chip wanted him to think. He did what the chip wanted him to do. But in the moments between sleep and waking, in the quiet hours before dawn, fragments of his old self would surface. He would remember who he had been, a commander, a leader, a man with a purpose beyond factory work. He kept these thoughts hidden. He was not stupid. If the Velkari discovered that his chip was defective, they would replace it with a new one, or they would simply execute him and be done with it. So Teo played the role of the obedient worker, just like billions of others. But he watched. He observed. He began to understand the patterns of the alien surveillance system. He learned where the guards rotated. He discovered which areas of the factory had dead zones in the monitoring system. And then one day, everything changed. Teo was in one of those dead zones, and a young man appeared beside him. His name was Jisoo, and he was carrying something that should not exist. It was a small electronic device, crude and clearly handmade. More importantly, it was a jammer, a tool designed to disrupt the signals between the neural chips and the alien control network. "You are not fully controlled," Jisoo whispered. It was not a question. Jisoo had experienced the same glitch in his own chip. He had been searching for others like him, people whose neural chemistry was slightly different, whose genetic code did not match the profiles the Velkari had expected to find. Teo was one of maybe 1,000 humans among billions who had this defect, and Jisoo had been finding them, one by one. Over the next weeks, Teo learned the truth. Jisoo had been a hacker before the invasion. He had survived the neural chip installation the same way Teo had, with a partial failure in the control system. While working in an alien communication center, Jisoo had pieced together enough knowledge to build the jammer. It would not remove the chips. It would only disrupt their signal for a few hours at a time. But those few hours were enough for people to think clearly again, to remember who they were. Jisoo gave Teo a choice. He could return to his dormitory and live out his life as a controlled worker. Or he could join the resistance. It was an easy choice for a man who had spent 18 months trapped inside his own mind. Teo was brought to a hidden location, a basement beneath the ruins of Seoul that the aliens had never discovered. There, he found 23 other people like him, people whose chips had glitched, people who had been slowly waking up to the reality of their enslavement. And there was someone else there, too. A woman named HFY. She was sitting at a makeshift table covered with pieces of alien technology and human computers. She had been a scientist before the invasion, and now she was working on the same problem that had consumed her thoughts since the day she received her compliance chip. She had discovered something remarkable. The chips were not actually perfect. They had a fatal flaw. If you understood how they worked, if you had the right combination of human neurology and quantum computing knowledge, you could crack them. You could create a counter-virus that would disable them permanently without destroying the human brain beneath. "How long?" Teo asked her. "I don't know," HFY replied. "The technology is complex. The Velkari have safeguards built into the chip architecture that I do not fully understand yet. But I am close. I can feel it. Give me time, and I will find a way." Teo believed her. He saw it in her eyes, the same determination that had once driven him to command soldiers. She was a leader too, just in a different way. While Teo was the tactical mind, HFY was the visionary. Together, they might actually have a chance. Jisoo brought 2 more people into the group. Minsu was an engineer who understood how to build weapons from salvaged Velkari technology. Nari was a former Special Forces operative who had survived the invasion by hiding in the mountains for months. She had been conducting solo sabotage operations against alien supply lines, burning cargo ships, and destroying equipment. With this new group, her work could finally have a larger purpose. They worked in secret for 3 months. HFY made breakthrough after breakthrough. She had access to some of the alien technology through her work, though she was careful to hide what she was learning. Slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand the neural chip's architecture. She understood the quantum encryption that protected it. Most importantly, she understood the weakness. The chips had to communicate with a central network to maintain control. If that communication could be disrupted at the right moment, if the signals could be inverted through a specific frequency pattern, the entire system could be overridden. The day finally came when HFY announced she had created the counter-virus. It was stored in a small device that looked like nothing important, just a piece of scrap metal. But inside, it contained the code that could break the chains that bound billions of humans. They tested it on a volunteer, a man named Dojin, who worked in a transport facility. The procedure was simple. The jammer blocked his chip signal for exactly 2 minutes. In that time, HFY's counter-virus was uploaded directly into the neural implant. When the jammer stopped, the chip was dead. Dojin's eyes cleared for the first time in 18 months. He could think again. He could choose again. He could be human again. "It works," HFY said quietly. "It actually works." That night, a single thought crystallized in Tayo's mind. This small group, this handful of people working in secret, had just changed everything. They had cracked the code. They had found the door to freedom. Now came the hard part. They had to open that door for billions of others. The Velkari had no idea what was coming. They were confident in their control, confident in their technology, confident in their superiority. They did not understand that they had enslaved a species that, when freed, would burn with a fury they could not imagine. The aliens had made a single critical mistake. They had assumed that humans would stay broken forever. They had not counted on the fact that humans could break the tools used to break them. Word began to spread through the underground network. A resistance existed. Freedom was possible. People who had lived in despair for 18 months began to feel hope again. And with hope came something far more dangerous than hope. What came next was rage. A fury that had been building in the human heart since the moment the first Velkari ship appeared in Earth's sky. That fury was about to be unleashed. The speed of human mobilization shocked everyone, including Tayo himself. What began as a small resistance cell in Seoul's ruins spread across the entire planet like wildfire. Every person who received the counter-virus became a node in the network. Every person who regained their freedom wanted to help others find the same freedom. Within 3 months, over 1 million humans had been freed from the neural chips. Within 6 months, that number had multiplied to 50 million. Tayo had become the leader of a military force. It was ironic, considering he was a soldier without an army, fighting an enemy that could destroy him with the push of a button. But he was a natural at it. He understood strategy. He understood how to coordinate operations across distances. He understood how to make people follow him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He was a commander again, and this time he was fighting for something that mattered more than national borders or political power. He was fighting for the very concept of human freedom. The resistance set up command centers in hidden locations. Tayo coordinated from a massive underground facility beneath the Korean peninsula. HFY worked in a research laboratory that was moved constantly, never staying in one location long enough for the Velkari to track it down. Minsu had trained thousands of fighters to build weapons from salvaged alien technology. Nari had become the most feared name in the Dominion Alliance military, known for her ability to strike at critical infrastructure and vanish without a trace. The Velkari response was brutal and immediate. They realized that their perfect system of control was failing. They sent soldiers into human settlements. They conducted mass executions to instill fear. In 1 week alone, they killed over 3 million people in retaliation for the resistance activities. But the executions had the opposite effect. Fear turned to anger. Grief turned to determination. Every body that fell in the streets became a reason to fight harder. Tayo watched footage of the executions on screens in his command center, his hands clenched into fists. He had seen death before. He had commanded soldiers who died in combat. But this was different. These were civilians. These were people who had been freed for only a few weeks before the aliens put bullets in their heads. He felt the rage building in his chest, and he did not try to suppress it. He let it fuel his determination. "We hit their supply lines," he said to his commanders. "We hit them everywhere, all at once. We take away their resources. We make it harder for them to maintain control. Every day they waste hunting us is a day they are not consolidating their power." The campaign began in earnest. Resistance cells struck at military installations, alien processing centers, and supply depots. Factories that had been forced to manufacture alien weapons were sabotaged from the inside. Ships carrying supplies were destroyed before they could reach their destinations. The Velkari found themselves fighting a war they were not prepared for. They were used to commanding superior force against conventional enemies. They were not used to fighting an enemy that appeared to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Then Haiwan made another breakthrough. She had managed to penetrate the alien communication network using salvaged equipment and human computer systems that worked in harmony with Velkari technology. For the first time, the resistance could listen to the enemy's strategic discussions. The information she obtained was invaluable. The humans learned about alien troop movements before they happened. They learned about supply schedules and defensive positions. Most importantly, they learned something that terrified the Velkari more than any military defeat. The aliens were afraid of them. In intercepted communications between the Supreme Collective and military commanders, the Velkari admitted something they had never admitted before. They feared human adaptability. They feared human aggression. They had assumed that humans were a docile species that could be easily controlled. The neural chips were supposed to suppress the very traits that made humans dangerous. But the chips were failing, and the traits were resurfacing faster than the Velkari could suppress them. Humans were proving to be more dangerous as enemies than as slaves. A young soldier named Yeon Hee came to Tayo with a plan. She had been a Special Forces operative before the invasion, and she had studied the Velkari defenses extensively. She believed she could lead a team to the primary enforcement station that orbited Earth. If they could destroy the central control hub that coordinated all the alien military operations in the solar system, it would paralyze the Velkari response. It would give the resistance breathing room to organize on a larger scale. "It is a suicide mission," Teo said to her. "Yes," Yeon-hee replied. "But I am going anyway." Teo wanted to order her not to go. He wanted to protect her like a commander protects his soldiers. But he saw something in her eyes that he recognized. The same thing he saw in his own reflection. The understanding that some things were worth dying for. The belief that the cost of failure was greater than the cost of death. He gave her the resources she needed. 47 soldiers volunteered to accompany her. They trained for weeks on captured alien equipment. They planned every detail of the operation. And then, on a night when the orbital station was at its most vulnerable point, they launched their attack. Yeon-hee and her team infiltrated the station using a Velkari shuttle that Min-soo's engineers had reprogrammed. They moved through the corridors, killing aliens when they had to, avoiding them when they could. They reached the central control hub. Yeon-hee set the explosives herself, her hands steady even as alien weapons fire erupted around her. The charges detonated. The hub exploded in a massive burst of energy that lit up the night sky over Earth. 17 members of Yeon-hee's team made it back to Earth. 30 of them did not, but they had succeeded. The central control hub was destroyed. The careful coordination that the Velkari had maintained began to crumble. Millions of humans who had still been controlled by the neural chips suddenly felt the control slip away. They were free. They joined the resistance. The momentum was undeniable now. Other resistance leaders emerged across the planet. Do-jin coordinated operations in Africa. Soo-jin commanded the Pacific Fleet operations, using salvaged alien ships to control the seas. Kai-tae led the underground intelligence network, gathering information and distributing it to resistance cells across the globe. The Velkari were no longer the dominant force on Earth. They were the occupiers, fighting a war they could not win. They had biological superiority and technological advancement, but they were fighting against an enemy that fought with nothing to lose and everything to gain. They were fighting against humans, and humans, when truly desperate, were capable of things that no alien species had ever encountered before. Teo stood in his command center, watching reports of operations succeeding across the planet. For the first time since the invasion, he allowed himself to feel something like hope. Humanity was not broken. Humanity had been bent, but not broken. And now, the bent human spirit was straightening, filling with the kind of rage and determination that could shake the foundations of empires. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. Humans had destroyed a Velkari military station. Humans had freed themselves from neural control. Humans had begun winning battles against the Dominion Alliance. On 1,000 enslaved worlds, beings that had accepted their fate as permanent slaves suddenly began to wonder if freedom was possible. The insectoid Zethrax, who had been enslaved for 200 years, began to organize resistance cells of their own. The crystalline silicate collective, whose members had been used as living computers for the Velkari, started refusing to process alien commands. The feline Culliern, whose warriors had been forced to fight in the Dominion Alliance's armies, began to turn their weapons on their masters. The spark that Tai-O and Haiwan had ignited on Earth was spreading. It was becoming a fire that threatened to consume the entire empire. Tai-O made a decision that would change everything. He realized that humanity could not win this war alone. The Velkari had too many resources, too many worlds, too much military power. But if the enslaved species of the galaxy united, if they coordinated their efforts across light years, they might actually have a chance. He sent messages across the galaxy using Haiwan's hacked communication systems. He reached out to every resistance movement he could find. He offered something that no enslaved species had ever offered before. He offered partnership. He offered alliance. Ambassadors from dozens of enslaved worlds came to Earth in secret, using stolen ships and hidden routes. They arrived at the new resistance capital that Teo had established in what used to be Seoul. They were beings of every conceivable shape and size. They communicated in dozens of different languages. But they all shared one thing. They all wanted to be free. Teo stood before them and spoke words that would be remembered for millennia. The Velkari believe they are superior to all of us. They believe they can control us because we are weaker than them. They believe they can keep us enslaved forever because we are divided. But they are wrong. We are not weak when we stand together. We are not divided anymore, and we will take back our freedom, no matter what the cost. The alliance was forged that day. It was called the Coalition of Free Peoples. Teo became the supreme commander of the combined forces. It was a title he had never sought, but it was one he accepted with the understanding of its weight. He was now responsible for the freedom of billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Haiwan took on an even more critical role. She began working with scientists and engineers from a dozen different species. Together, they developed a weapon that would fundamentally change the nature of the war. The Velkari had always relied on their telepathic network to coordinate their military operations. This network was their greatest advantage. Every Velkari was connected to every other Velkari, allowing for perfect coordination and instant communication. They could think as one, act as one, move as one. It was the source of their dominance. Haiwan's new weapon targeted this network directly. It was a virus, much like the counter-virus she had created for the neural chips, but far more sophisticated. If deployed correctly, it could disrupt the Velkari telepathic network across an entire region of space. It would not destroy the Velkari, but it would cut them off from each other. It would reduce them to isolated individuals unable to coordinate with their own kind. For beings that had never existed as individuals, that had always been part of a collective consciousness, it would be devastating. How long until it is ready? Teo asked her. Days, Haywan replied. Maybe less. It is beautiful in its way. It is elegant. It will show the Velkari that we can turn their greatest strength against them. The coalition began moving. Ships from human Earth, insectoid Zethrax hives, crystalline silicate worlds, and feline Kiliern battlecruisers assembled near the Velkari home system. It was the largest military force ever gathered by enslaved peoples. The Velkari detected the assembly and moved to intercept. They were confident. They always were. They had never lost a war. They had never faced an enemy that could hurt them. The first major battle erupted near a space station designated as Velkari Defense Platform 7. Coalition forces attacked with precision and overwhelming numbers. The Velkari responded with their normal tactics, using their superior weapons to destroy coalition ships by the dozens. But this time, the coalition was not trying to win through direct military superiority. They were executing a plan. As the battle raged, Haywan deployed the virus. It spread through the Velkari communication network like poison through a bloodstream. The telepathic connections that bound the Velkari civilization together began to fail. Commanders in the middle of coordinating attacks suddenly found themselves unable to communicate with their soldiers. Ships that were moving in perfect formation suddenly became confused, unable to understand orders that had not been given through conventional means. The Velkari, for the first time in their entire existence, found themselves fighting alone. The coalition overwhelmed them. Platform 7 fell. 30,000 Velkari soldiers died. For the first time, the aliens suffered a devastating military defeat. And more importantly, they suffered it while their telepathic network was disrupted. For the first time, they experienced something like fear. They experienced the knowledge that they could be hurt, that they could be beaten, that the thing they had believed would never happen was actually happening. The war escalated from that point forward. Coalition forces launched coordinated attacks on Dominion Alliance worlds. The Velkari adapted, developing countermeasures to Haywan's virus. But by the time they adapted to one version, Haywan had already created 3 new versions. It became a technological war within the larger military war. Haywan's team of scientists fought against Velkari scientists. Code fought against code. Ideas fought against ideas. But it was on the battlefields where the true change took place. Human soldiers from Earth fought alongside insectoid warriors from the Zethrax hives. Crystalline beings whose forms of thought were completely alien worked with feline strategists to plan devastating assaults. The diversity of the coalition became its strength. Where the Velkari were unified but now isolated, the coalition was diverse but unified by common purpose. Reports came back to Taio's command center of victories across the galaxy. The Velkari hold on the outer territories was weakening. Enslaved worlds were declaring independence. Military bases were falling to coalition forces. It was becoming clear, even to the Velkari, that the war was turning against them. In one intercepted communication, a Velkari commander admitted to the Supreme Collective what everyone was beginning to understand. We made an error when we enslaved humanity. They have proven to be more resilient, more aggressive, and more dangerous than our initial analysis indicated. They have now armed and allied themselves with every other enslaved species in the galaxy. We are facing extinction. Teo read the words on his command screen, and he understood that they were approaching something fundamental. The Velkari were beginning to comprehend what they had created. They were beginning to understand that they had not enslaved a broken species. They had ensured the unity of a species that, when united, was unstoppable. They had made a mistake that was about to cost them everything. The Dominion Alliance was falling apart. Worlds that had been loyal to the Velkari for centuries were declaring independence. The weaker species that made up the lower ranks of the alliance were abandoning their Velkari masters, either joining the coalition or attempting to negotiate peace treaties of their own. The empire that had seemed eternal, that had conquered and controlled dozens of worlds without mercy, was crumbling like ancient stone. Some of the Velkari leaders proposed surrender. They understood that the war was lost. They understood that continuing to fight would only bring more death and destruction. But the Supreme Collective would not accept surrender. For the Velkari, submission was worse than death. They were a species that had never known defeat. The idea of yielding power was literally incomprehensible to their minds. So instead of surrendering, they decided to make one final stand. They decided to defend their home world. Teo received the intelligence from Kite's agents. The Velkari had moved their entire military force back to their home system. They had fortified their capital world with every defense system they could deploy. They were preparing for a siege. More than that, they were preparing for extinction rather than submission. If the coalition tried to take the Velkari home world, the Velkari were prepared to detonate weapons that would destroy the planet entirely, killing billions of their own people rather than allowing it to fall to what they considered inferior species. "They will not win," Teo said to his war council. "But they believe they can bargain with death. They believe that if they are willing to die, we will be unwilling to follow them into the grave. We will show them that they are wrong. We will go into that grave if we have to, because freedom is worth it." The coalition assembled the largest fleet ever built. Thousands of ships from dozens of civilizations, soldiers from every enslaved world, engineers, pilots, scientists, warriors, strategists, and leaders, all moving toward the Velkari home system. It was not just a military operation. It was a migration of billions toward a final confrontation that would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Teo led the assault personally. He stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive human battleship that had been built in secret over 3 years of war. The ship was impressive, even compared to Velkari vessels. It was fast and deadly and perfectly designed for what was about to happen. Around it, thousands of other coalition ships moved in formation. The aliens' home world appeared on the screens, beautiful and green and utterly foreign to human eyes. And it was surrounded by weapons. Thousands of weapons pointing outward, ready to destroy anything that tried to approach. The Velkari opened fire before the coalition fleet even got close. Entire squadrons of coalition ships exploded. Humans, Zethrax, silicate beings, and Kellier'n warriors all died in the opening minutes of the assault. But the coalition did not slow. They did not waver. They returned fire with their own weapons. Human plasma cannons, Zethrax biomissiles, crystalline phase cannons, and Kellier'n kinetic accelerators all pounded the Velkari defenses. Haywan, commanding from her research ship, unleashed her most powerful creation. She released the virus directly into the Velkari homeworld's network. The entire planet's defensive grid was controlled by a central telepathic intelligence. That intelligence suddenly found itself disconnected from all other Velkari minds. It panicked. Its systems began to fail. The defensive weapons became erratic and less effective. The coalition fleet pushed through. They landed ground troops on the Velkari homeworld. Teo himself led the first assault wave, standing alongside Yan He, who had survived her suicide mission and become the most decorated soldier in the coalition army. They fought their way through alien soldiers and alien defenses. Humans fought with weapons that had been primitive before the invasion and were now advanced beyond anything their ancestors could have imagined. Humans fought with rage that had been building for 3 years. Humans fought for every person who had died in slavery, every person who had been stripped of their freedom, every person who had been told that submission was their only choice. The Velkari fought too. They fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. They fought with the knowledge that they had underestimated their enemies and paid a terrible price for that mistake. But they could not adapt fast enough. They could not overcome the sheer numbers of the coalition. More importantly, they could not overcome the will of species that had nothing left to lose. Teo pushed deeper into the Velkari capital city. The streets were beautiful and clean, built with architecture that seemed to shift and flow. But they were now filled with the sounds of battle and the scent of violence. Coalition soldiers moved through the city, destroying Velkari military positions and liberating the few enslaved species that remained on the home world. Finally, Teo reached the central command chamber. The Supreme Collective waited for him there. The telepathic leader of the entire Velkari civilization stood facing a human commander. Two species. One moment. The fate of billions hanging in the balance. Teo could have killed them all. He had the power and the weapons and the justification. Every atrocity the Velkari had committed, every person they had enslaved, every world they had conquered, gave him the right to execute them without mercy. But something made him hesitate. Something in him understood that killing them would not bring back the dead. It would not free the enslaved. It would only continue the cycle of violence. Instead, Teo spoke. His words were heard by every Velkari still alive on the planet. They were broadcast to every coalition world. They were recorded and would be remembered for millennia to come. You believed you were superior to us. You believed you could break us and we would stay broken. You believed we would accept slavery forever because you made the chips to make us accept it. But you made a mistake. You enslaved a species that refuses to be enslaved. A species that, when pushed to the edge of extinction, responds with a fury that you could never imagine. We are not inferior to you. We are different. And our difference is strength. You will surrender. You will yield power. And you will live knowing that you were beaten by the people you believed were beneath you. That is your punishment. That is the cost of your arrogance. The Supreme Collective understood that the war was truly over. They did not surrender because they accepted their defeat. They surrendered because they had no other choice. The Velkari civilization, which had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, was no longer the dominant power. The age of the Velkari was finished. The age of the freed peoples was beginning. Billions of Velkari soldiers laid down their weapons. Velkari commanders accepted their prisoner status. The Dominion Alliance ceased to exist. In its place, something new began to form. A galactic order based on freedom, on cooperation, on the understanding that no species could dominate another. Not through force, not through technology, not through any means. Teo stood in the command chamber and thought about the 3 years of war. He thought about the millions who had died. He thought about Yeon-hee, standing beside him, her armor scorched and stained with the blood of enemies and comrades alike. He thought about Haiwan, who had made victory possible through brilliance and determination. He thought about all the soldiers from all the worlds who had fought and suffered and bled to reach this moment. The war was over. Humanity had answered enslavement with fury. That fury had shattered an empire. Now came the most difficult task of all, building something new, something better. Something that could stand as a beacon of hope for a galaxy that had known only darkness and domination for far too long.